My name is Abhi CG, and the topic I'm presenting is the background and history of land reforms. So, first we look at what land reforms are. Land reforms generally refers to the redistribution of land from the rich to the poor, but it is much broader and includes a regulation of ownership, operation, leasing, sales, and inheritance of land. During the British rule, the land ownership in India changed drastically. Many land held collectively by communities throughout India were seized. Taxes were levied under systems like zamindari, riyatwari, and mahalwari. The landowning upper class belonging to the minority became more and more powerful by exploiting the cultivating peasants and amassing wealth. After independence, India adopted a socialistic view which envisioned social, economic, and political equality. And land reforms were a tool to meet the end of achieving social and economic equality. Land reforms under the state list and became the responsibility of each state to make legislations. So far, the only attempts at land reforms that can be considered successful happened in Kerala and West Bengal. In states like Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Bihar, it led to communal clashes. So, land reforms can be divided into four components. The first one being abolition of intermediaries. It was the most effective among the other steps of land reforms. The abolition of intermediaries brought the state into direct contact with the cultivators. It took away the superior economic and political power, and a considerable portion of cultivable wasteland and private land were vested with the state. The next is tenancy reforms. Its main objective was to regulate rent, provide security of tenure, and confer ownerships to tenants. Before legislation, the rent paid by tenants were oppressive. After its enactment, the fair rent was fixed at 20 to 25% of the gross produce level in all states except Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Tamil Nadu, and some parts of Andhra Pradesh. So the next component is fixing ceilings on land holdings. The maximum size of a land or farm household can hold was laid down to prevent the concentration of lands in the hands of a few. The Kumarappan Committee in 1942 laid down the maximum limit of land a landlord can retain as 3 times economic holding. In 1961 to 62, Land Ceilings Act was passed, but the limits varied across states. In 1972, the national guidelines fixed the ceilings limit according to various factors such as kind of land, its productivity, etc. By fixing ceilings, the state can redistribute the surplus land to the landless and other underprivileged communities. The last component is consolidation of land holdings. Consolidation of land means the reorganization of fragmented lands or plots. The fragmentation of land made the management of irrigation and overall supervision of land difficult. Consolidation saved the time, cost, and labor it takes to cultivate plots of land that are separated. Laws of land consolidation were enacted in almost all states except Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, and parts of Andhra Pradesh. Next is Bhudan and Gramdan movements. The Bhudan movement, which began in 1951, led by Vinoba Bhave, urged the upper class to voluntarily surrender parts of their land to the landless. The central and state governments provided the necessary assistance. The Bhudan movement paved the way to Gramdan movement, which persuaded landholders to hand over the land rights, so it would belong to a village association and it would be cultivated jointly. A village was declared Gramdan if at least 75% of its residents with 51% of land signified their approval in writing to Gramdan. So next we look at the history of land reforms in Kerala. The Kerala had a large variety of tenures comparing with the rest of the world, and was very much connected to the caste system prevalent at the time. A major hypothesis is that land was used communally for joint cultivation up until 1000 CE. This kind of communal settlement during the Sangam period gradually changed into a Brahmin-centered one and eventually to a temple-centered one. The immigrant Brahmins who acquired land to build temples, which were the nerve center of social and political life. The cultivators were made to believe that land should be transferred to the chieftains as a token of respect, and thus emerged the Khan tenure. The Nayars, Nambudiris who helped make these transfers acquired some land in the process. The people belonging to the upper class hierarchy considered farming beneath their status, and so they leased the land to the lower classes like Iravas, Muslims, and Tiyas, etc. Some argue that the land owning upper class never infringed the rights of the leaseholders and demanded only a nominal share of the produce. And it was only after the coming of the Britishers there emerged a more stringent form of feudal relation. The Mysorean conquest during the 18th century altered the land relations in Malabar and introduced for the first time in Kerala direct taxation of land. But the East India Company annexed Malabar in 1792 CE to Bombay Presidency and later to Madras Presidency, and the lands were restored back to the landowners. So next we look at the land reforms that happened in Travancore. The lands conquered by the Travancore Raja was annexed by the state and was converted to land owned Sukha lands or Pandaravaga lands. These lands were leased out to cultivators who only had to pay the land revenue assessment and nothing more. The rulers encouraged cultivation of wasteland through assumptions and concessions. The state came to own 80% of the land and it became the largest owner of land. The Pattam Proclamation of 1865 conferred ownership to all tenants of Pandaravaga land, and land became a heritable, saleable and mortgageable property. The 1885 Proclamation, the Jammi-Kudian Regulation Act of 1896, provided security to the tenants of Janmam and private lands. And so, at the beginning of the 20th century, 75% of farmers had their own land in Travancore. These followed many of the legislations made land a property or commodity in the modern sense. So, next is the history of land reforms in Cochin. In Cochin, 60% of the land was owned by the Janmis. The Sirkar land holders had no ownership rights, and the Janmam landholders feared arbitrary eviction. The Royal Edict of 1863 prevented arbitrary eviction, but the tenants had to face eviction after 12 years. The Revenue Settlement of 1899 to 1905 conferred ownership right to Pandaravaga tenants. Despite several legislations related to tenancy reform like Cochin Tenancy Act of 1914, Cochin Tenancy Act of 1938, Cochin Verumpattam-Das Act of 1943, etc., absentee landlordism, sharecropping, etc., continued to exist. Next is the history of land reforms in Malabar. In Malabar, the British considered the Janmis as the sole owners of land, and they were made to act as their agents. They misunderstood the distinct tenancies prevalent there and reduced the rights to various tenants. It resulted in forming a harsher form of feudal relation. Relief was that the Malabar Tenancy Act of 1929, which conferred a city of tenure and fair rent on all cultivating Verumpattam-Das. Even though the administrators encouraged the occupation of wasteland and forest land, as most lands were in the hands of private Janmis, it did not bear fruit. So the economic development was very slow paced. So after the States Reorganization of Act was passed, Kerala became a state on November 1st of 1956. The Malayalam-speaking regions of Travancore, Cochin, Malabar and South Canara were consolidated into a single unit. The land reforms that took place after can only be explained by delving into the political background prevalent at the time. So that's I have to say. Thank you. My name is Abhijit CG, and the topic I'm presenting is the background and history of land reforms. So first we look at what land reforms are. Land reforms generally refers to the redistribution of land from the rich to the poor, but it is much broader and includes a regulation of ownership, operation, leasing, sales and inheritance of land. During the British rule, the land ownership in India changed drastically. Many land held collectively by communities throughout India were seized. Taxes were levied under systems like Zamindari, Riyatwari and Mahalwari. The landowning upper class belonging to the minority became more and more powerful by exploiting the cultivating peasants and amassing wealth. After independence, India adopted a socialistic view which envisioned social, economic and political equality. And land reforms were a tool to meet the end of achieving social and economic equality. Land reforms under the state list and became the responsibility of each state to make legislations. So far, the only attempts at land reforms that can be considered successful happened in Kerala and West Bengal. In states like Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Bihar, it led to communal clashes. So land reforms can be divided into four components. The first one being abolition of intermediaries. It was the most effective among the other steps of land reforms. The abolition of intermediaries brought the state into direct contact with the cultivators. It took away the superior economic and political power, and a considerable portion of cultivable wasteland and private land were vested with the state. The next is tenancy reforms. Its main objective was to regulate rent, provide security of tenure, and confer ownerships to tenants. Before legislation, the rent paid by tenants were oppressive. After its enactment, the fair rent was fixed at 20 to 25% of the gross produce level in all states except Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Tamil Nadu, and some parts of Andhra Pradesh. So the next component is fixing ceilings on land holdings. The maximum size of a land or a farm household can hold was laid down to prevent the concentration of lands in the hands of a few. The Kumarappan Committee in 1942 laid down the maximum limit of land a landlord can retain as 3 times economic holding. In 1961 to 62, Land Ceilings Act was passed, but the limits varied across states. In 1972, the national guidelines fixed the ceilings limit according to various factors such as kind of land, its productivity, etc. By fixing ceilings, the state can redistribute the surplus land to the landless and other underprivileged communities. The last component is consolidation of land holdings. Consolidation of land means the reorganization of fragmented lands or plots. The fragmentation of land made the management of irrigation and overall supervision of land difficult. Consolidation saves the time, cost, and labor it takes to cultivate plots of land that are separated. Laws of land consolidation were enacted in almost all states except Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, and parts of Andhra Pradesh. Next is Bhudan and Gramdan movements. The Bhudan movement, which began in 1951, led by Vinoba Bhave, urged the upper class to voluntarily surrender parts of their land to the landless. The central and state governments provided the necessary assistance. The Bhudan movement paved the way to Gramdan movement, which persuaded the landholders to hand over the land rights so it would belong to a village association and it would be cultivated jointly. A village was declared Gramdan if at least 75% of its residents with 51% of land signified their approval in writing to Gramdan. So next we look at the history of land reforms in Kerala. The Kerala had a large variety of tenures comparing with the rest of the world and was very much connected to the caste system prevalent at the time. A major hypothesis is that land was used communally for joint cultivation up until 1000 CE. This kind of communal settlement during the Sangam period gradually changed into a Brahmin-centered one and eventually to a temple-centered one. The immigrant Brahmins who acquired land to build temples, which were the nerve center of social and political life. The cultivators were made to believe that land should be transferred to the chieftains as a token of respect, and thus emerged the Khan tenure. The Nayars, Nambudiris who helped make these transfers acquired some land in the process. The people belonging to the upper class hierarchy considered farming beneath their status, and so they leased the land to the lower classes like Iravas, Muslims, and Tiyas, etc. Some argue that the land owning upper class never infringed the rights of the leaseholders and demanded only a nominal share of the produce. And it was only after the coming of the Britishers there emerged a more stringent form of feudal relation. The Mysorean conquest during the 18th century altered the land relations in Malabar and introduced for the first time in Kerala direct taxation of land. But the East India Company annexed Malabar in 1792 CE to Bombay Presidency and later to Madras Presidency, and the lands were restored back to the landowners. So next we look at the land reforms that happened in Travancore. The lands conquered by the Travancore Raja was annexed by the state and was converted to land owned Sukka lands or Pandaravaga lands. These lands were leased out to cultivators who only had to pay the land revenue assessment and nothing more. The rulers encouraged cultivation of wasteland through assumptions and concessions. The state came to own 80% of the land and it became the largest owner of land. The Pattam Proclamation of 1865 conferred ownership to all tenants of Pandaravaga land, and land became a heritable, saleable, and mortgageable property. The 1885 Proclamation, the Jemmikudi Regulation Act of 1896, provided security to the tenants of Janmam and private lands. And so, at the beginning of the 20th century, 75% of farmers had their own land in Travancore. These followed many of the legislations made land a property or commodity in the modern sense. So, next is the history of land reforms in Cochin. In Cochin, 60% of the land was owned by the Janmis. The Sirkar land holders had no ownership rights, and the Janmam landholders feared arbitrary eviction. The Royal Edict of 1863 prevented arbitrary eviction, but the tenants had to face eviction after 12 years. The Revenue Settlement of 1899 to 1905 conferred ownership right to Pandaravaga tenants. Despite several legislations related to tenancy reform like Cochin Tenancy Act of 1914, Cochin Tenancy Act of 1938, Cochin Verumpattamdas Act of 1943, etc., absentee landlordism, sharecropping, etc., continue to exist. Next is the history of land reforms in Malabar. In Malabar, the British considered the Jinmis as the sole owners of land, and they were made to act as their agents. They misunderstood the distinct tenancies prevalent there and reduced the rights to various tenants. It resulted in forming a harsher form of feudal relation. Relief was that the Malabar Tenancy Act of 1929, which conferred a city of tenure and fair rent on all cultivating Verumpattamdas. Even though the administrators encouraged the occupation of wasteland and forest land, as most lands were in the hands of private Jinmis, it did not bear fruit. So the economic development was very slow paced. So after the States Reorganization of Act was passed, Kerala became a state on November 1st of 1956. The Malayalam-speaking regions of Travancore, Cochin, Malabar, and South Canara were consolidated into a single unit. The land reforms that took place after can only be explained by delving into the political background prevalent at the time. So that's I have to say. Thank you.
In this session, let's have a clear check on the economic and social objectives of land reforms along with its relation to the 5-year plans, and also the political background of the land reforms in Kerala, how it has been evolved from its initial stage, what are the changes it has gone through. So these are the main things that we are going to check in detail in this session. So first of all, to begin with, land reforms are visualized as an instrument of social justice and as a step against the concentration of land holdings in the hands of a few absentee through the imposition of ceilings on the size of holdings which can be owned by a family. Although land reforms are popularly understood to mean redistribution of land, the scope is much wider. Land reforms alter the power structure, both economic and political. Since the land has always been a source of wealth, income status, and a reflection of the interlocking class and caste structure of Indian society, it empowers the actual tillers of the soil and enables them to seek development benefit from the state. Thus, they are also a means of increasing agriculture production through land development, as the interest of peasants in investing in the land they own grows significantly. Apart from this, land reforms would also enable a more equitable distribution of land, which in turn will generate incomes on a mere equitable basis. The generation of such incomes will lead to greater demand for industrial goods through increased purchasing power among the lower sections of the society who do not possess any land whatsoever. These land reforms are seen as a way of not only increasing income and employment in the agriculture sector but also in the industrial sector. So from this we clearly understood the main objectives of land reforms, which can be summed up as: first one, restructuring agrarian relations to achieve an egalitarian social structure. Secondly, eliminating exploitation in land relations. And thirdly, land to the tiller. And also finally, increasing agricultural production, infusing equality in society. And these objectives can be concluded into two. That is, to change the agrarian structure in a way as not to obstruct but promote the growth of agriculture, and to replace the old land system by a new one free from the exploitative features which characterize the former. So looking on to the relation between 5-year plans and land reforms, it was the Congress Agrarian Reform Committee 1949 under the chairmanship of J.C. Kumarappa highlighted the necessity of undertaking land reform measures. And on this basis, proposals for land reform should address 5 principal interests, namely the intermediaries, large owners, owners of small and medium-sized plots, tenants at will, and landless workers. So according to this committee report, the major objectives of land reforms includes elimination of all intermediaries between the state and the actual tillers of the soil, and finally the fixation of a reasonable rent. Detailed proposals on land reforms were set out in the second 5-year plan, and they include the abolition of intermediaries, tenancy reforms, ceiling on land holdings, agrarian reorganization, including consolidation of holdings and prevention of subdivision and fragmentation. Later, the Planning Commission accepted the principle that there should be an absolute limit to the amount of land which an individual may hold. In order to eliminate legal and procedural bottlenecks and circumvention of the ceiling law, the sixth plan document pointed out that it is necessary to ensure that the land declared surplus to the ceiling is taken by the state, it is distributed and physically delivered to the eligible categories expeditiously, the allottees are given adequate financial, material and technical assistance to bring the land under productive cultivation, and the sixth plan document provided for the setting up of village committees, that is, this is necessary for better implementation of land reforms, and this is the basic idea behind our reform movement and our plans focused on land reforms. The eighth plan, which was from 1992 to 97, stressed that landlessness is a root cause of rural poverty. The plan set 7 objectives of land reforms, which includes restructuring of agrarian relations to achieve egalitarian social structure, elimination of exploitation in land relations, the actualization of the goal of land to the tiller, improvement of the socio-economic conditions of the rural poor by widening their land base, increasing agricultural productivity and production, facilitating land-based development of the rural poor, and infusion of a greater measure of equality in local institutions. So that was all about the land reforms and its relation to the 5-year plans. Now looking on to the political background of the land reforms, the state of Kerala was officially formed in the year 1956 and the first democratically elected government assumed office on 5th April 1957. The government issued the Kerala Stay of Eviction Proceeding Ordinance of 1957, and this ordinance helps to protect tenants and hutman dwellers from eviction until comprehensive agrarian reforms could be framed. In spite of delays in implementation and circumvention of the legislation, the abolition of tenancy was a remarkable success. This was followed by the Agrarian Reform Bill, which was adopted by the Kerala Assembly in June 1959. Its outcome, the Kerala Agrarian Relations Bill, CART, was a landmark in the history of Kerala. The Land Reforms Bill of 1959, introduced by the First Ministry, had the very clear objective of breaking landlordism. It wanted to realize the slogan of land to the tiller, which had been the promise of the freedom struggle. The idea was to make tenants the owners of the land they cultivated and to ban future tenancy in all forms, resuming land for own cultivation, which was an euphemism for tenancy at will or wage-based cultivation, and which had been the bane of land reforms undertaken by other governments, was not permitted. Before long, in conjunction with the opposition, unleashed the liberation struggle that eventuated in the dismissal of the ministry. Accordingly, the new Congress PSP government did not waste time and legislated the Land Reforms Act 1963, diluting almost all provisions of the CART. Once the mission accomplished, the ministry fell and subsequently the state has undergone a long spell of central rule. On assuming power, the communist government brought in the Kerala Stay of Eviction Proceedings Act 1967. The re-adornment of the first government for a further term in 1967 allowed for new legislation to undo the evictions with retrospective effect and to re-modify the KLR Act, resulting in the Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969. This is because in the course of implementation of the state government had faced serious practical difficulties, and to overcome them, that act was extensively amended by the Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969 and by the Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1970. And the Kerala Land Reforms as amended by the Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969 contain 3 important programs. Which includes the abolition of landlordism, conferring ownership rights to cultivating tenants of the lands leased in by them, then the enfranchisement of the landless, that is indulging into the segment of social justice. The government allotted small parcels of land to the landless to build their homesteads. It was decided that the government would purchase the land and give it to the homeless and landless. And finally, that is taxing rich and helping the poor, that is taking over the surplus land by imposing a ceiling and distributing the same along landless laborers and poor peasants, and the ceiling was fixed at 5 standard acres for an individual and 15 for a family. This is all about the main objectives, that is the social and economic objectives of the land reforms and its relation to the 5-year plans, how it has been evolved using the 5-year plans in India, and also the political background of the land reforms. In the coming sections, it will be checked in detail.
Land law, preamble and definitions. Objectives: incentive to tillers with security of tenure, reasonable rent and ownership. Reduce size of big holdings to eliminate inequalities. Set free rural productive forces to expand agricultural production. Abolition of zamindari system. Organized effort for agricultural reconstruction. Rational use of resources. Social welfare. Planned development. Raising of standard of living. Though a bill was piloted during 1959, only in 1963 a comprehensive land reform act could be passed. The following are the essential features of the act. Abolition of intermediaries, fixity of tenure, fixing of fair rent, ceiling on holdings, distribution of surplus land, setting up land boards and land tribunals, balanced approach to landlord and tenant. Definitions. Cultivating tenant. A tenant in actual possession of land entitled to cultivate land in his holdings. Customary dues. Anything other than rent, michavaram or renewal fees, payable in cash or kind by a tenant to landlord, or allowed to be taken by the landlord from the holding periodically or on the happening of any event or on the occasion of any festival, and includes ഓണക്കാഴ്ച, ഉത്സവക്കോപ്പ്, പെരുന്നാൾ കാഴ്ച and ആറടിയന്തിരം. കാണം. The transfer for consideration in money or in kind or both by a person of an interest in specific immovable property to another person and described in the document evidencing the transaction as kanam or kanapatam, the incidents of which transfer include right in the transferee to hold the said property liable for the consideration paid by him or due to him, the liability of the transferor to pay to the transferee interest on such consideration unless otherwise agreed to by the parties, and payment of michavaram or customary dues or renewal on the expiry of any specified period, or the transfer for consideration in money or in kind or in both by a person of an interest in specific immovable property to another person for the latter's enjoyment, whether described in the document evidencing the transaction as സ്വത്തി, കരിപ്പണയം, പണയം, പാട്ടപ്പണയം or any other name, and which has the നേർപ്പണയം or incidents specified in subclauses above, and also one or more of the following incidents: A. Renewal on the expiry of any specific period. B. Payment of michavaram. കുടികിടപ്പുകാരൻ. A person who has neither a homestead nor any land exceeding in extent 3 cents in any city or major municipality, or 5 cents in any other municipality, or 10 cents in any other panchayat area or township, in possession either as owner or as tenant, on which he could erect a homestead, and who has been permitted with or without payment of any rent by a person in lawful possession of any land to have the use and occupation of a portion of such land for the purpose of erecting a homestead. കുടിയിരുപ്പ്. A holding or part of a holding consisting of the site of any residential building, the site or sites of other buildings appurtenant thereto, such other lands as are necessary for the convenient enjoyment of such residential building, and easements attached thereto, but does not include a കുടികിടപ്പ്. Then കുഴിച്ചുവയ്പും കുടിയിരുപ്പും. A transfer by a landlord to another person of garden lands or of other lands or of both situated in Malabar, reserving the right to enjoy the fruit-bearing trees standing thereon at the time of transfer for purpose of making improvements thereon, and described as such in the contract of tenancy. കുഴിക്കാണം. A transfer by a landlord to another person of garden lands or of other lands or of both, with all or any other trees, if any, standing thereon at the time of the transfer, or without such trees, for the purpose of planting trees or pepper vines or both thereon, and for the enjoyment of the trees transferred, if any. Plantation. Any land used by a person principally for the cultivation of tea, coffee, cocoa, rubber, cardamom, or cinnamon, and includes a. Land used by the said person for any purpose ancillary to the cultivation of plantation crops or for the preparation of the same for the markets. B. Agricultural lands interspersed within the boundaries of the area cultivated by the said person with plantation crops not exceeding such extent as may be determined by the land board or taluk land board as necessary for the protection and efficient management of such cultivation. Michavaram. The money or produce or both specified as Michavaram in the document evidencing the transfer by a person of an interest in specific immovable property to another person and includes the balance of money or produce or both payable periodically under the document evidencing such transfer after deducting from the money or produce or both due to the transfer the interest due on the amount advanced to the transfer but does not include customary dues. Smallholder. A landlord who does not have interest in land exceeding 8 standard acres or 10 acres in extent, whichever is less, as owner, intermediary, or cultivating tenant, or in 2 or more of the above capacities, so that the extent of non-redeemable land in his possession as owner or as cultivation tenant, or partly as owner and partly as cultivating tenant, does not exceed 2.5 standard acres or 4 acres in extent, whichever is greater. Vechupagudi. A transaction whereunder a landowner permits another person to be in joint possession with him of any land with the following stipulations. The Vechupagudidar shall improve the land within a specified period. At the end of the period so specified, the land shall be partitioned between the landowner and the Vechupagudidar in a specified proportion, and upon such partition all the rights of either party over the portion of the land set apart for the other shall stand transferred to and best in the other. Tenant. Any person who has paid or agreed to pay rent or other consideration for his being allowed to possess and enjoy any land by a person entitled to lease that land and includes the heir, assignee, or legal representatives of any person deriving rights through any such person or has paid or has agreed to pay rent or other consideration as intermediary, a kanamdar, a kanam kudikanamdar, a kudikanamdar, an Otti kudikanamdar, Malganidar, Verumbatamdar, the holder of Chalgani lease, the holder of a Kudirappu, a person holding lands under Kulchuipum Kudirapum, the holder of a Karaima, the holder of a Vaidagani lease, a person who is deemed to be a tenant. Kanam Kudikanam. A transfer by a landlord to another person of garden lands or of other lands or of both, with all or any other trees, if any, standing thereon at the time of the transfer, or without such trees for the purpose of planting trees or pepper vines or both thereon, and for the enjoyment of the trees transferred, if any, the incidents of which transfer include right in the transferee to hold the said lands liable for the consideration paid by him or due to him, which consideration is called kanartham, and the liability of the transferor to pay to the transferee interest on the kanartham unless otherwise agreed to by the parties. Karaima. A transfer of land situated in the Kozhikode district or in the Ponnani Taluk of Malappuram district in consideration of ground rent, principally for the purpose of erecting a homestead, and described as Karaima in the document, if any, evidencing the transfer. That's all. Thank you.
Kerala Land Reforms Act 1963. General exemptions. Section 3 of the Act deals with exemptions. By virtue of Section 3 of the Act, the provisions of Chapter 2 are not applicable to the following transactions. The Chapter 2 of the Kerala Lands Reforms Act 1963 deals with various rights and liabilities of landlord, tenants and Kudiyadappar. First point, leases of land or of buildings or of both belonging or vested in the government of Kerala or the government of any other state of India or the government of India or a local authority or the Cochin Port Trust or a corporation owned or controlled by government of Kerala or the government of India. Leases only of building including a house, shop or warehouse and the site thereof with the land if any appurtenant thereto. However, permission given to a Kudiyadappar to occupy a hut shall not be deemed to be a lease of building for the purpose of this clause. Leases of land or of buildings or of both specifically granted for industrial or commercial purpose. Tenancies of land or buildings of both created by the Administrator General or of the official trustee or an official receiver or officer appointed by court under the provisions of any law or by the court of words or by any person holding under or deriving title from any of the officers or the court aforesaid. Tenancy in respect of land or of buildings or both created by mortgagees in possession or by person deriving title from such mortgagees. Tenancies in respect of land or of buildings or of both created by persons having only life interest or their limited interest in the land or in buildings or in both. Leases of private forest. Private forest means a forest which is not owned by the government. Tenancies in respect of plantation exceeding 30 acres in extent. Plantations means any land used by a person principally for the cultivation of tea, coffee, cocoa, rubber, cardamom or cinnamon. Tenancies in respect of site, tank and premises of any temple, mosque or church, including site belonging to a temple, mosque or church on which religious ceremonies are conducted, and sites of his building and other buildings are attached to such temple, mosque, church created by the owner, trustee or manager of the temple, mosque, church. However, this clause shall not affect the right to which the tenant was entitled immediately before the commencement of this act under contract of tenancy or under any law in force. Land transferred for felling of trees. Any transaction relating only to the usufruct of trees or to the tapping of coconut or the palm trees or to the tapping of rubber trees. Deemed tenants. The following persons are deemed tenants under Kerala Land Reforms Act 1963. First one, Odachatthudar and the persons claiming under Odachatthudar. By virtue of Section 4, an Odachatthudar or a person claiming under an Odachatthudar is deemed to be tenant. In order to treat an Odachatthudar as an deemed tenant, he or his predecessor in interest should be actually cultivating the land to which Odachatha relates on 11th day of April 1957 and on 1st day January 1970. Second one, mortgages and lessees. By virtue of Section 4A, mortgagee with possession of land principally planted with rubber, coffee, tea, or cardamom, or leases of a mortgagee of such land shall be deemed to be tenant. If any one of the following conditions are satisfied, mortgagees must hold the land for continuous periods of not less than 15 years or of 20 years or 13 years before 1st January 1970. Third one, mortgages with possession. By virtue of Section 5, a mortgagee with possession of immovable property situated in Cochin shall be deemed to be a tenant if the property is agricultural land other than the land planted with rubber, coffee, tea, or cashew, and the interest on the mortgagee amount is less than 40% of the total rent fixed in the mortgage document. Fourth one, mortgages holding land on verum partum. By virtue of Section 6, mortgagee with possession of immovable property situated in Cochin shall be deemed to be a tenant if the following conditions are satisfied. The property is agricultural land. The mortgagee or his predecessor in interest was holding the property as Verumpatanda or on after first day of Chingam 1111, and also Verumpatanda was terminated after that day. Fifth one, person who were holding land on or after 1st December 1930. By virtue of Section 6A of the Act, a person in possession of immovable property in any area in the state to which Malabar Tenancy Act 1929 extended shall be deemed to be tenant. Sixth one, mortgages in areas to which Malabar Tenancy Act. By virtue of Section 6B of the Act, a mortgagee with possession of immovable property on 1st January 1970 in any area in the state to which the Malabar Tenancy Act 1929 extended shall be deemed to be tenant. Seventh one, leases who have made substantial improvements. By virtue of Section 6C, a person in occupation of the land on 1st January 1970 on the basis of leases deemed executed after 1st April 1964 shall be deemed to be a tenant. Eighth one, the person occupying land honestly believing to be a tenant. By virtue of Section 7 of the Act, a person in occupation of land of another situated in Malabar on 1st January 1970 shall be deemed to be a tenant if he or his predecessor in interest was continuously in occupation of such land honestly believing himself to be a tenant for not less than 2 years within the period of 12 years immediately before 11th day of April 1967. Ninth one, person occupying land for not less than 10 years. By virtue of Section 7A of the Act, a person shall be deemed to be a tenant in respect of land of another in his occupation. if he or his predecessors in interest occupied such land believing to be a property of government, or subsequent to such occupation such land has become the property of such other person as a consequence of any judgment, decree or order of any civil court, and such land has been in continuous occupation of such a person for a period of not less than 10 years before 1st January 1970. 10th one, the person occupying land under lease is granted by incompetent person. Section 7b 1, 2 and 3 says about that. 11th one, the person who have paid amount for occupation of land by virtue of section 7c, a person who is in occupation of the land of another on 1st January 1970 shall be deemed to be a tenant. 12th one, person occupying private forest or unsurveyed lands, and section 7d says about that. The person who were cultivating on Varam agreement by virtue of section 8, a person who by virtue of the provisions of section 6 of the Kerala stay of eviction proceedings Act 1957 was entitled to cultivate any nilam after 11th April 1957 and was cultivating the nilam on 1st April 1964 shall be deemed to be tenant. 14th, one person who surrendered leasehold rights but continued in possession. By virtue of section 9, a tenant holding land on or after 11th April 1957 shall be deemed tenant. 15th one, other person to be deemed tenant. By virtue of section 10, the following person shall be deemed tenants. Punam or Kumari cultivator, licensee, Varamdar, Vech Pagudidar. 16th one, the person who are presumed to be tenant. By virtue of section 11 of the Act, if in a document a person is described as a Sambala Patanda, Sambala Chittudar or Kuli Patada in respect of any nilam situated in the Palakkad, Thrissur district or in Kuttana district, he shall be presumed to be a tenant for all purpose of this Act. The presumption is rebuttable by adducing evidence to show that Sambala Patanda has not undertaken any risk of cultivation. That's all.
Hi friends, now we will discuss about fixity of tenure. Every tenant shall have fixity of tenure in respect of his holding, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in any law, custom, usage or contract or in any decree or order of court. But fixity of tenure shall not be conferred if the landlord is a member of the armed forces or is seaman or who is the legal representative of such a landlord. This is said in section 13. A tenant's holding can be restored by applying to the land tribunal if he was disposed of the land in his occupation on or after the first day of April 1964, and such person, if would have been a tenant under this Act as amended by Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969. His or his holding has been sold in execution of any decree for arrears of rent after the first day of April 1964 and before the commencement of Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969 and also been disposed. His holding has been sold in execution of any decree for arrears of rent but not been disposed. Holding has been sold for recovery of damages for committing based on the holding but tenant not been disposed. In case the land resumed by landlord from the cultivating tenant fails without reasonable excuse, to use the land for the purpose for which it is resumed. A land vested to the tenant can be resumed in below situations. A trustee or owner of the place of public religious worship may resume from the tenant for the purpose of extending the place of public religious worship, and collector of the district certifies that the same is so needed. And a landlord who is not in possession of any land other than Nilam and less than 2 acres can resume land for the purpose of constructing a residence for himself or for any of his member of his family. A landlord who requires land for cultivation or plantation may resume. A smallholder may resume from his tenant who is in possession of land exceeding the ceiling area, subject to the conditions. Resumption of land shall be subject to the following conditions and restrictions. Resumption cannot be done if the landlord is a minor, a person of unsound mind, a member of armed forces, or a seaman. The right of resumption in respect of holding shall be exercised only once, and the order of the land tribunal allowing resumption shall be given effect only at the end of the agricultural year. No Kodiyirippu shall be resumed. No land in the possession of tenant who is a member of scheduled caste or scheduled tribe shall be resumed. Tenants from whom land is resumed to be paid compensation for improvements and solatium of an amount equal to the value of the gross produced on the land resumed for a period of 2 years, whichever is greater. This is said in section 20. Fair rent. Section 27 says about the fair rent, which is the rent payable by the cultivating tenant to his landlord. And the fair rent shall be, in case of the Nilams, 50% of the contract rent or 75% of the fair rent determined under any law, or the rent calculated at the rate specified in Schedule 3. Or in the case of other land, 75% of the contract rent or 75% of the fair rent determined under any law in force, or the rent calculated at the rate specified in Schedule 3. Determination of fair rent by the land tribunal. The cultivating tenant or any landlord may apply in such form as may be prescribed to the land tribunal for determining the fair rent in respect of the holding. This is set in section 31. Rent payable when land tribunal has not determined fair rent. Where in the case the rent payable in rent of a holding has not been determined by the land tribunal, either under section 31 or 33, the landlord shall be entitled to receive and the tenant shall be bound to pay the rent. Liability for assessment. The tenant shall be liable for any cess or special charges leviable by the government and is also entitled to deduct the tax paid to the government from the rent payable to the landlord. This is set in section 37. Now we will see some other rights entitled to the tenant. A cultivating tenant, if prevented or obstructed from cultivating that land, he may apply to the Tahsildar for an order that he is entitled to cultivate the land. Where a portion of the land comprised in the holding is acquired under any law for the time being in force for the compulsory acquisition, he is entitled to abatement of rent. Where any material portion of the holding is wholly destroyed or rendered, the rent payable shall be proportionally reduced. He can apply for that. No tenant shall be liable to pay to his landlord any customary dues or fees or anything more than the rent payable. Every tenant paying any rent shall be entitled to receive, and the landlord shall be bound to grant a receipt containing such particulars. Subject to the provisions, all rights of the tenant shall be heritable and alienable. A tenant entitled to fixity of tenant shall have the right to use his holding in any manner he thinks fit, but should not contravene any order issued under the Essential Commodities Act 1955. A tenant may terminate the tenancy in respect of any land held by him at any time to the government only. All timber trees planted by the cultivating tenant after the commencement of the tenancy shall belong to the cultivating tenant. He also has the right to cut and remove the trees. Bar of suits for eviction. During the pendency of any application for determination of the fair rent before land tribunal, no court shall entertain any suit for eviction of the applicant. Abandonment of land by the tenant. If a land is abandoned by tenant, government after giving notice take possession of the land and pay fair rent to the landlord. The government may let the land to any other tenant and the new tenant shall pay the fair rent directly to landlord. Now we will see next chapter. Purchase of landlord's right by cultivating tenants. The cultivating tenant, including the holder of Kodiyirippu and the holder of Karayama, entitled to fixity of a tenure under section 13, shall be entitled to purchase the right, title, and interest of the landowner and the intermediaries, if any, in respect of the land comprised in his holding. This is said in section 53. A cultivating tenant entitled to purchase the right, title, and interest of the landowner may apply to the land tribunal for the purchase of such right in the prescribed form. If he is entitled in respect of only a portion of the land, he may indicate his choice of portion which he decides. This is set in section 54. Purchase price. The price payable by the cultivating tenant for the purchase of right, title, and interest of the landowner and the intermediaries, if any, shall be the aggregate of 16 times the fair rent in respect of the holding or part thereof to which purchase relates, and the value of structures, wells, and embankments of the permanent nature belonging to the landowner or the intermediaries, if any, and one half of the value of timber trees belonging to the landowner or the intermediaries, if any. Where an application under section 54 has been allowed and the purchase price determined under section 57 by the land tribunal, cultivating tenant shall deposit with the land tribunal to the credit of the land board the purchase price determined and shall issue a certificate of purchase, which is set in section 59. Cultivating tenant to pay the rent pending determination of purchase price. Payment of purchase price, amount of encumbrance, maintenance, or alimony. The purchase price of the value of the encumbrance, maintenance, or alimony payable to the landowner and the intermediaries shall be distributed by the land board according to the provisions of section 63 2 to 9. Such payment shall be full discharge of the liability and no further claim shall be laid. Section 68, 69, etc. says about the effect of vesting of religious, charitable, or educational institution of public nature on the government. Vesting of landlord's rights in government. On a date to be notified by the government, all rights of landowners in respect of holdings held by the cultivating tenants entitled to fixity of tenure under section 13 and in respect of which certificates of purchase have not been issued shall vest in the government free from all encumbrances created by the landowner. This is set in section 72. And cultivating tenant's right to assignment. The cultivating tenant of any holding which is vested in the government shall be entitled to assignment of right of such holding. He won't be entitled to such assignment if he or his family own an extent of land not less than ceiling area. Even if he is entitled to assignment, he can have the assignment of land only to such extent of land as will together with the land owned by him or his family be equal to the ceiling area. Land tribunal to issue notices and determine the compensation and purchase price. As soon as the rights of landowner and intermediaries of the holding have vested in the government and the land tribunal receives the application for the assignment of land to cultivating tenant, the land tribunal shall publish a public notice calling upon all persons interested in the land to prefer claims and objections, if any. After clearing the objections, the land tribunal will determine the various payments between the parties. Cultivating tenant is not liable to pay rent if resumption application rejected. This is set in section 72 QQ. Liability of assessment after the date of vesting under section 72. Where the rights of landowners in respect of any holding vested in government and also in case of application of resumption of land is rejected, the cultivating tenant of that holding shall be liable to pay the taxes and cesses due in respect of that holding, which is set in section 72S. Discharge of arrears of rent. The landlord of a tenant specified in column 1 of the table below shall be entitled to recover towards arrears of rent accrued due before the first day of May 1968 and outstanding at the commencement of the Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act 1969 only the amount specified in the corresponding entry in the column 2 of the table. This is the table. First column gives the class of tenant and the second column is mentioned the amount of rent to be paid for discharge. And the section 74 says that after the commencement of this act, no tenancy shall be created in respect of any land. Thank you.
The topic is rights and liabilities of Kudigadappukaran. The term Kudigadappukaran is defined in section 2 clause 25 of the Kerala Law Reforms Act 1963. Kudigadappukaran means a person who has neither a homestead nor any land exceeding in extent 3 cents in any city or major municipality, or 5 cents in any other municipality, or 10 cents in any panchayat area or township, in possession either as owner or as tenant on which he could erect a homestead and who has been permitted with or without an obligation to pay rent by a person in lawful possession of any land to have the use and occupation of a portion of such land for the purpose of erecting a homestead, or who has been permitted by a person in lawful possession of any land to occupy with or without an obligation to pay rent a hut belonging to such person and situate in the said land. And Kudigadappu means the land and the homestead or the hut so permitted to be erected or occupied together with an easement attached thereto. The next one is rights and liabilities of Kudigadappukaran. So what are the rights and liabilities of Kudigadappakaran? The first one is fixity of tenure. Section 75 of Kerala Land Reforms Act gives fixity of tenure or permanent rights of occupancy to Kudigadappakaran. However, Kudigadappakaran is liable to be evicted from the Kudigadappu on the following grounds. The first one is he has alienated his rights of Kudigadappu to another person. However, if he has alienated his rights of Kudigadappu to a member of his family or to a person who has no other homestead or any land in possession either as owner or as tenant on which he could erect a homestead and whose annual income does not exceed 2000 rupees, he is not liable to be evicted. And the second point is he has rented or leased out of his entire Kudigadappu to another person for a period of not less than 2 years. And third point is he or his near relative ceased to reside in the Kudigadappu continuously for a period of 2 years. And next one, he has another Kudigadappu or has obtained ownership and possession of land which is fit for erecting a homestead within a distance of 5 kilometers from the Kudigadappu if the extent of the land obtained by him is not more than 3 cents in a city or major municipality or 5 cents in any other municipality or 10 cents in a panchayat area or township. He is not liable to be evicted. And the last one is he has obtained ownership and possession of not less than 25 cents in extent of land situated beyond a distance of 5 kilometers. The next right is right to purchase. By virtue of section 80A of the Act, a Kudigadappukaran shall have the right to purchase the Kudigadappu occupied by him and the land adjoining thereto. The extent of land which the Kudigadappukaran is entitled to purchase shall be 3 cents in a city or major municipality or 5 cents in any other municipality or 10 cents in panchayat area or township. The purchase price payable by a Kudigadappukaran in consideration of the purchase shall be 25% of the market value of the land purchased and the improvements thereon. If the improvements are belonging to the Kudigadappukaran, he need not pay price for such improvements. The purchase price payable by the Kudigadappukaran shall be met from the Kudigadappukaran benefit fund constituted under section 109 of the Act. A Kudigadappukaran entitled to purchase the Kudigadappu may apply to the land tribunal for such purchase. The land tribunal shall, after giving notice to the persons interested in the land and after due enquiry, pass such orders on the application as it thinks fit. An order allowing an application shall specify the extent of land which the Kudigadappukaran is entitled to purchase. The purchase price payable shall also be mentioned in the order. The land tribunal shall issue a certificate of purchase and thereupon the right, title and interest of the land owner shall vest in the Kudigadappukaran. The purchase price payable by the Kudigadappukaran shall be distributed by the land tribunal among the landowners. And the next right is customary rights. Section 79 deals with Kudigadappukaran is entitled to all customary rights. He has the right to maintain, repair and reconstruct the homestead, but he cannot increase the area. And section 78 deals with the right of Kudigadappukaran are heritable but not alienable except to the members of his family. Section 80 provides for a register of Kudigadappukas to be prepared and maintained in each village. Sons of Kudigadappukaran dividing the hut into several portions cannot claim separate Kudigadappu. Shifting of Kudigadappukaran. A landowner can require the Kudigadappukaran to shift to a new site on the following grounds. The first one is for constructing a building for his own residential purpose or the residential purpose of his family members. The second point is for the purpose of town planning scheme. Third point is for any industrial purpose. Such shifting shall be with the following conditions. The first condition is landowner to pay the price of the homestead. The second one is allocation of a new site within a distance of 1 mile. And the third point is the area of new site to be equal to old site. And the fourth one is the landowner to transfer ownership of a new site to him. And the last one is landowner to pay reasonable cost for shifting. The next right is right of Kudigadappukaran is heritable. By virtue of section 78 of the Act, the rights of Kudigadappukaran in his Kudigadappu is heritable. And the next right is right to maintain, repair and reconstruct the homestead or hut. The Kudigadappukaran shall have the right to maintain, repair and reconstruct with the same or different materials the hut belonging to the person who permitted occupation by the Kudigadappukaran at his cost. However, the area shall not be increased by more than 50%. And the next right is right to place any electric supply. A Kudigudappukaran is entitled to place any electric supply line on the land for the supply of electrical energy to the Kudigudappu for domestic consumption without consent of the water of the land. And the next right is right to lay down any pipe for the purpose of supply of water. A Kudigudappukaran is entitled to lay down any pipe over or under the land for the purpose of supply of water to the Kudigudappu for domestic consumption without the consent of the owner of the land. Next topic is shifting of Kudigudappu. A Kudigudappukaran is liable to be shifted to a new site. The person in possession of the land on which there is a Kudigudappu may require the Kudigudappukaran to shift to a new site belonging to him on the following grounds. The first one is he requires the land for constructing a building for his own residence or for the residence of any member of his family, including major sons and daughter. Next one is he requires the land for purpose in connection with a town planning scheme approved by the competent authority. And the third point is he requires the land for any industrial purpose. The shifting will be subject to the following conditions. The first one is the landholder shall pay to the Kudigudappukaran the price of the homestead erected by the Kudigudappukaran. And the next one is the landholder shall pay to the Kudigudappukaran the reasonable cost of shifting the Kudigudappu to the new site. And the third point is the landholder shall transfer ownership and possession of the new site to the Kudigudappukaran. And the fourth one is it shall be within a distance of 1 mile from the existing Kudigudappu. And if all the above conditions are satisfied, the Kudigudappukaran shall be bound to shift to a new site. And the next topic is filing of suits against Kudigudappukaran in certain cases. If the Kudigudappukaran does not comply with the requisition made by the person in possession of the land under subsection 2 of section 75 or by the owner under subsection 4 of that section to shift to a new site, the person in possession of the land or the owner, as the case may be, may institute a suit against him for the purpose. The court, on being satisfied that such person has complied with all the conditions mentioning in subsection 2 or subsection 4 of the section 75, may pass a decree for shifting the Kudigudappu, provided that no such suit shall be instituted without giving the Kudigudappukaran 1 month's notice by registered post. Next one is deposit of purchase price and issue of certificate of purchase. Where the Kudigudappukaran is liable to pay his share of the purchase price, he shall deposit the first installment thereof with the land tribunal within a period of 6 months from the date on which the order of the land tribunal under subsection 3 of section 88B has become final, or within such further period not exceeding 6 months, as may be allowed by the land tribunal for reasons to be recorded. As soon as may be after the order of the land tribunal under subsection 3 of the section 88B has become final, the land tribunal shall issue a certificate to purchase in such form and containing such particulars as may be prescribed, and thereupon the right, title and interest of the landowner, the intermediaries if any, and the person in possession where he is not the landowner in respect of the land allowed to be purchased, shall vest in the Kudigudappukaran free from all encumbrances with effect from the date on which the order of the land tribunal under the said subsection 3 has become final. After the issue of the certificate of purchase in respect of any land under subsection 2, the land tribunal may, on application by the Kudigudappukaran, put him in possession of the land if needed be by removing any person who refuses to vacate the same. And where the certificate of purchase is issued to the Kudigudappukaran is in respect of another portion of the land, and the Kudigudappukaran does not vacate in existing Kudigudappu within a reasonable time after the issue of such certificate, the land tribunal shall cause him to be evicted from the existing Kudigudappu. The installments of the purchase price shall be deposited in the government treasury in the prescribed manner to the credit of the land tribunal.
Hi, my name is Prashant, roll number 51, 32nd B batch. My topic is Ceiling Areas and Authorities under Land Reforms Act. Ceiling legislations. The Kerala Land Reforms Act came into force in the year 1964. The national level, the major objective of land reforms have been reordering of agrarian relations in order to achieve an egalitarian structure, elimination of exploitation in land relations, realizing the age-old goal of land to the tiller, enlarging the land base of rural poor, increasing agriculture productivity, and infusing an element of equality in local institutions are some of the major objectives of land reforms. With a view to achieve the said objectives, Kerala Act imposes certain restrictions on ownership and possession of land properties in state of Kerala. There is what is commonly known as ceiling on the total extent of land that a person can hold. The word person in this context means and include a company, family, joint family, association or other body of individuals, whether incorporated or not, and any institution capable of owning a property. Ceiling area. The ceiling area of land shall be A. In the case of an adult unmarried person or a family constituting of sole surviving member, 5 standard acres. So, however, that the ceiling area shall not be less than 6 and more than 7.5 acres in extent. B. In the case of family consisting of 2 or more, but not more than 5 members, 10 standard acres. So, however, the ceiling area shall not be less than 12 and more than 15 acres in extent. C. In the case of family consisting of more than 5 members, 10 standard acres increased by 1 standard acre for each member in excess of 5. So, however, that the ceiling area shall not be less than 12 and more than 20 acres in extent. And in case of any other person other than a joint family, 10 standard acres. So, however, that the ceiling area shall not be less than 12 and more than 15 acres in extent. Exceptions. There are, however, exceptions to the above rules. The principal exceptions are plantations, private forest, government lands, house sites, commercial sites, land owned by mosques, temples, universities, public trusts, etc. In order to qualify for the exception, it is to be proved that a particular plantation was existent to the promulgation of Kerala Act 1964. Rubber, tea, and cardamom are principal plantations that are exempted from ceiling limits. Constitution of Land Tribunal. The government may, by notification in Gazette, constitute one or more land tribunal or land tribunal for any area for any class of cases specified in the notification for the purpose of performing the functions of a land tribunal under this Act. B. The land tribunal shall consist of a sole member who shall be a judicial officer of the rank of a munsif or an officer not below the rank of a tahsildar appointed by the government. And in a constitution of appellate authority, the appellate authority shall consist of a sole member who shall be a judicial officer not below the rank of a subordinate judge or an officer not below the rank of a deputy collector. Constitution of Land Board. The government shall constitute a land board for the whole state for performing the functions of a land board. Under this Act, the board shall consist of a sole member who shall be a member of Board of Revenue or an officer not below the rank of a secretary to government appointed by the government or of the 3 members. Where the board consists of 3 members, the member shall be a member of the Board Revenue or an officer not below the rank of secretary to government appointed by the government who shall be the chairman. A judicial officer not below the rank of a district judge nominated by the government in consultation with the High Court. An officer of the government nominated by the government. 100A. Constitution of Taluk Land Boards. The government shall by notification in the Gazette constitute a Taluk Land Board for each Taluk in the state for performing the functions of the Taluk Land Board under this Act. Second, a Taluk Land Board shall consist of a following members, namely an officer not below the rank of a deputy collector appointed by the government, who shall be the chairman of the board. Then not more than 6 members nominated by the government. Next, powers of land board and land tribunal. The land board and the land tribunal constituted under this act shall have powers of civil court while trying a suit under the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 in respect of the following matters, namely: the first, summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person and examining him on oath, requiring the discovery and production of any document, receiving evidence on affidavit, issuing commissions for the examination of witness or for local investigation and any other matter which may be prescribed. The land board shall have superintendence over all the land tribunals, appellate authorities and taluk land boards. Then, wherein any proceeding before the land tribunal, a question arises whether a person is a small holder or not, or whether a person is not a tenant, it shall be competent for the land tribunal to decide the question. Then, if any question arises as to whether any land is exempted under section 81, the question shall be decided by the land board in such a manner and having regard to such matters may be prescribed, and the decision shall be final. Next, appeal to appellate authority. The appellate authority may admit an appeal presented after the expiration of the period prescribed under subsection 1. It is satisfied that the appellant had sufficient cause for not presenting it within that period. In deciding appeals under subsection 1, the appellate authority shall exercise all the powers which a court has and follow the same procedure which a court follows in deciding appeals against the decree of an original court under the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. Then, where there has been any modification in appeal from any decision or order of land tribunal, such a decision or order shall be modified accordingly. Next, establishment of State Land Tribunal, Land Reforms Tribunal. Jurisdiction, powers and authority of State Land Reforms Tribunal. Save as otherwise expressly provided in this Act, the State Land Reforms Tribunal shall exercise all the jurisdiction, powers and authority exercisable by all courts except the Supreme Court under Article 32 and Article 136 of the Constitution in relation to the matters enumerated in subsection 2 to 6. Any person aggrieved by any final order passed in the appeal against the order of the land tribunal, or any final order passed by the land board under this act, or any final order of the taluk land board under this act may, within such a time as may be prescribed, prefer a petition to the State Land Reforms Tribunal against the order on the ground that the appellate authority or the land board or the taluk land board, as the case may be, has either decided erroneously or failed to decide any question of law. Next, in any petition for revision preferred under subsection 2, the government shall be made a party. Next, the government may, within such time limit as may be prescribed, prefer a petition for revision to the State Land Reforms Tribunal against any final order referred to in subsection 2 or any of the grounds mentioned in the subsection. The State Land Reforms Tribunal may, after giving an opportunity to the parties to be heard, pass such orders as it deems fit, and orders of the appellate authority or the land boards or the taluk land boards, as the case may be, shall wherever necessary be modified accordingly. The State Land Reforms Tribunal may, for the purpose of satisfying itself that an order made by the land tribunal under section 26 in case where the amount of areas of rent claimed does not exceed 500 rupees as according to the law call for the records and pass such order with respect thereto as it thinks fit. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tanzir Khan. I'm roll number 41 and my topic is case laws relating to Kerala Land Reforms Act and its implementations and impacts of the Kerala Land Reforms Act. So the main case laws relating to Kerala Land Reforms Act are two, that is Karimbal Kunyikoman versus State of Kerala and Govindadaru Namboodiripad and others versus State of Kerala. So in Karimbal Kunyikoman versus State of Kerala, the Supreme Court in its judgment stated that it has struck down the Kerala Agrarian Relations Act as unconstitutional in its application to the right-of-way lands of Hostorg and Kasaragod taluks as violative of Article 14 of the Constitution of India. In the Govindadaru Namboodiripad and others versus State of Kerala case, the Kerala High Court declared that the Kerala Agrarian Relations Act as null and void, and the Act was repealed in 1961 and was substituted by the Kerala Land Reforms Act 1963. This Act has provisions relating to the fixation of ceiling of land holdings, the vesting of lands in excess of the ceiling in government, assignment of surplus land, abolition of tenancy systems, assignment of proprietary right on land to the cultivating tenants, the conferment of the right of Kudigadapugars to purchase land, and the constitution of a Kudigadapugars Benefit Fund. So these two cases laid foundation for the Kerala Land Reforms Act 1963. The next case is His Holiness Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala. The case is popularly known as the Fundamental Rights case, and in this case the petitioners challenged the Kerala Land Reforms Act 1963. Kerala has followed a course of development which is very different from other states. Agricultural growth in the state showed reasonable acceleration only from the early 1980s to the 1990s due to various agrarian reforms there, and the case of His Holiness has played a major role in these reforms. Nevertheless, poverty has registered impressive decline and the state has an outstanding record of social development. Land reforms appear to have contributed most of all to an improvement in the condition of agricultural laborers, freeing them from their personalized obligations, increasing their mobility and providing the basis for improved social development. Thus, while tracing direct causality remains hazardous, land reforms appear to have made an important contribution to observe rapid decline in poverty. So the Keshavananda Bharati case talks about the impacts the Kerala Land Reforms Act has made on the life of the tenants. The implementation of the Kerala Land Reforms Act has led to loss of land by the group which was traditionally concentrated, namely the Namboodiris. Consequently, the Namboodiris have also lost the status, power and authority which they enjoyed in the village during the pre-reform period. The gain of land by the groups which was traditionally dependent on the Namboodiris as cultivating tenants, that is the Ambalavasis, Nayars, Maniyanis, Vaniyans and the Thiyas, has brought about a marked improvement in their economic condition and altered the traditional patron-client and reciprocal and redistributive relationship which characterized the pre-reform village economy and society. It has also transformed the pre-reform subservient socio-economic relations to these groups towards the Namboodiris into egalitarian relations. The remaining four groups, that is the Mavans, artisans and service caste, Harijans and the Maplas, have not benefited much from the redistribution of land, especially wetland. So before the implementation of the Kerala Land Reforms Act, most of the lands were held by the Namboodiris of the land, and the other groups, that is the Ambalavasis, Nayars, Maniyanis, Vaniyans and the Thiyans, they were mostly cultivating tenants on the land. And after the reformation, after the implementation of the act, most of the land owned by the Namboodiris were distributed among these cultivating tenants, and which led to an improvement in their economic and social conditions. Land Reform Act had a positive impact on the economic and social status of the cultivating tenants. On the economic impact side, economic impacts on land reforms essentially relates to the effects on productivity, income, employment and investment. A defective tenure system stands in the way of investment and thereby productivity, income and employment. This is because the tenants had little incentive to increase his investments in the land and thereby increase his output, since a large share of any such increase will accrue to the landowner. Again, a large portion of products taken by the landlords leave the tenants with just mere subsistence with no margin for investment. Consequently, the tenants remain in a vicious circle of poverty. So the economic impacts brought about by the Kerala Land Reform said about the changes in these matters, the matters of productivity, income, employment and investment. Impact on the landlords. The agrarian reforms have profound effects on the economic status of the landlords. Prior to these reforms, they were owners of large landed property. These lands were mostly cultivable and were cultivated by tenants. Afterwards, the reforms, the landlords' right of ownership was placed on the same footing as that of the occupants. Land cultivated through tenants were the lands of the tenants, and the landlords were given only a restricted area for. They were made liable for full assessments, so simply they were not possessing the older rights and powers. Now the rights were equally distributed among the tenants and the landlords. So as a result of the same, the gap between the landlords and the tenants decreased, and it led to a rise of a more an egalitarian society. The Act had a very good impact on the tenants. It improved their status, income and productivity. The immediate effect of the tenancy reform was the improvement of the status of the tenants. The tenants become owners of the property on which they were cultivating. It was established that the absolute proprietary right in the land is on the person who carries on its cultivation. Consequently, the ownership holding and the operational holding significantly changed. On parts of impact on the productivity, after the reforms, the cultivation on lands had increased on large segments as the holdings are upon the tenants and not on the landlords. So when the tenants got ownership, they began to produce more. Also, the products taken by the landlords were also reduced to some extent. Thus, cultivation and output increased on a high ratio. Impact on employment and income. Regarding employments, an increase in use of labor led to more intensive and productive use of land with improved techniques and investment in land, which led to increased productivity. Thus, as a result, employment increased in a rapid ratio, and as a result, the income of the tenants and the employee increased in a rapid way. Impact on investment. When the ownership were given to the tenants, they began to invest more on their property to produce more. Thus, the investment ratio increased initially. But also other financial and non-financial agencies such as banks also invested on the land, hoping that they can keep the land as mortgages. So on the social side, the Act had a very good impact, very positive impact on the life of the tenants. It helped in the development of the area of the tenants, their family, the growth of their surroundings and all. Basically, the Act helped in economic development of the cultivating tenants. As a result, which also improved their social status. Basically, the social status improves as a result of economic independence. Basically, the land reforms aims at promoting social welfare for rural masses and also to end social injustice through equitable distribution of land to those who cultivate on them. So as a result, the Land Reforms Act made the society more egalitarian, and it eliminated the class differences between two sections of the society. So to conclude, the Kerala Land Reforms Act economically and socially uplifted the cultivating tenants and eliminated the class differences between the landlords and the tenants, creating a more egalitarian society. That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.